2, 3.
What is up, everybody? If you're new here, subscribe to the channel. If you're not, as you guys know, on this channel, we get right into it. All right, let's jump into today's case. In this video, we're going to talk about the lives of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, also known as the Toolbox Killers. They were responsible for planning and executing the kidnapping, torture, mutilation of 5 teenage girls in the LA area back in the 1970s. A tape recording of the crimes also exists out there, and it was played to the jury and 100+ people in the courtroom during their trial. What these two less than human scumbags did will go down as one of the worst crime sprees in Los Angeles and just California in general. So fair warning, viewers' discretion is heavily advised because I do plan on talking about it. First, I'm going to briefly touch on the crimes they committed that ultimately led the two men to meet in prison. Timestamps are available in the description if you want to jump around, but everything is relevant. All right, Lawrence Bittaker was in and out of juvenile hall in jail since he was 13 years old. His crimes, though, didn't become truly dangerous until 1974 when Bittaker was arrested for assault with attempted to commit murder. Bittaker was shoplifting from a supermarket when a male employee followed Bittaker out to the parking lot and calmly just said, "Hey, sir, did you maybe forget to pay by chance?" Bittaker, being a complete and utter psychopath, he turned around, closed the distance very fast from him and the supermarket employee, jumped on him, stabbed him one time in the abdomen, and quickly jumped off, went to run away. But at that point, 2 other supermarket employees were out there. They jumped on Bittaker, kicked the knife away, and subdued him until the police were called. The supermarket employee survived the attack, thank God. But because of the fact he survived, Bittaker was given a lesser sentence of assault with a deadly weapon. Bittaker was sent to California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo, where in my opinion, Lawrence Bittaker should have never seen outside those walls. Instead, while incarcerated there, he meets his future accomplice to the Toolbox murders, Roy Norris, who is equally as crazy. Roy Norris was a master manipulator. He used his high IQ for the worse, not the better. He was also, just like Bittaker, in and out of prison throughout his youth and pretty much his whole life. Well, Norris approached a 27-year-old woman walking home from a restaurant in Redondo Beach one night and offered her a ride on his motorcycle. She said, "No way." Norris parked his motorcycle, grabbed the woman by her scarf, twisted it, and pulled as hard as he could. He looked her dead in the eye and said, "I'm going to R-word you." He took her over to a big bush on the side of the road, and that's what happened. This poor girl did get a good look at Norris and was able to provide a good enough description that they were able to identify Roy Norris. He was convicted and sent, guess where? California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo, where, yep, you guessed it, met Lawrence Bittaker. Bittaker and Norris became friends after they both realized that they had a fascination in taking other people's lives, specifically young girls. They both spent a lot of time talking about their fascination, their childhood, their motives to hurt other people, and the fact that ultimately, if the chance did come up, both of them would act on it. They would do it. Something to note here, Norris claims that in prison, Bittaker saved his life twice, ultimately binding him to something called prison code. Essentially, Norris had to do whatever he said. Was that true? I don't know. So what did the two men do in prison? They plotted. Bittaker and Norris hatched a plan to R-word, then murder local teenage girls in the LA area. Their plan was to get out of prison and go on a mass killing spree. October of 1978, Lawrence Bittaker was released from prison, patiently waiting for his friend Norris to get out as well. When Roy Norris was released in 1979, he moved to LA with his mother. It is believed that they had an ancestral relationship. It was reported that within a month of being out of prison, Norris kidnapped and R-worded a woman, then just left her in the desert. The poor victim reported it to the police, but no physical evidence was able to be found, so it flew under the radar. Of course, Bittaker knew when Norris was getting out of prison, so within the months following of his release, Norris received a letter in the mail. Guess who it was from? Lawrence Bittaker. The two ended up meeting up in a hotel room, rekindling their relationship, and obviously having a huge huge discussion as to if they were really going to do this, carry out these murders and kidnappings. I wonder if a part of either of them in prison thought, hey, you know what? This is just a fantasy. This is not going to happen. Like, I wonder when a fantasy turned to reality. Regardless, they both came to a conclusion that they were both still down. In order for the two men to abduct the teenage girls, Bittaker decided instead of a car, they needed a van. Since Norris started working as an electrician right out of prison, believe it or not, they were able to afford it. They ended up buying a silver grayish 1977 GMC Vandura in February of 1979. The two men rigged this van up for one thing and one thing only. Really quick, guys, slap a like on this video so we can keep awareness around the victims' stories. Let's get back into it. The van that they rigged up was windowless on one side and had a large passenger side sliding door. According to Bittaker, when viewing the sliding door, he realized that him and Norris could just pull up next to their victim, not even have to open the sliding door all the way, reach out, grab them, and let that be that. Bittaker and Norris nicknamed this van Murder Mac. Who nicknames a van? From February to June 1979, Bittaker and Norris picked up over 20 female hitchhikers. The pair did not assault these females. They were strictly used as just testers, as ways to learn, to get good at picking up girls off the street. They used these girls as practice runs, essentially. They wanted to learn the patterns that happen when luring girls in. They would also test the girls' reactions when they would be driving down the road and veer off into somewhat of a remote area. But at the end of the day, they let these girls go. Imagine being those girls knowing what they know now, what their fate could have been. In late April, the pair found an isolated road in the San Gabriel Mountains. Bittaker broke open the lock with a crowbar and replaced it with one of his own. At that point, they were ready to officially abduct a girl. The poor unfortunate first victim was Lucinda Schaefer. Bittaker recounts in a written statement that their first abduction happened the same day that they installed the bed in the back of their van. They placed tools like hammers, pliers, screwdrivers under the bed, as well as an ice chest full of beer and drinks intended for themselves and to offer their victims. On that day, Norris and Bittaker were driving around in their van when they spotted the 16-year-old Lucinda Schaefer walking down the sidewalk, minding her own business. After trying to coax Schaefer into the van with beer, drinks, marijuana, she said no, go away. So the men pulled up the street a little bit, parked their van alongside of a sidewalk. Norris got out of the van, opened the sliding door. He halfway got in, and as Schaefer walked by, he got out real fast, said a few words, grabbed Schaefer, threw her into the van, got in, shut the door behind her, and that was that. Schaefer was gone. Bittaker in the driver's seat turned the radio full volume as Norris bound Schaefer's arms and legs and gagged her with duct tape. Bittaker immediately took off to the fire road in the San Gabriel Mountains, where they switched the lockout back in April, a few months back. Despite initially screaming for her life when she was abducted, Schaefer quickly regained her composure. In Bittaker's written statement to police after everything was said and done, Bittaker wrote this, and I quote, "Schaefer displayed a magnificent state of self-control and composed acceptance of the conditions which she had no control. She shed no tears, offered no resistance, and expressed no great concern for her safety. I guess she knew what was coming." End quote. I think she was trying to stay calm so she could have the best chance of getting out of there. She was probably trying to keep a clear mind. When they got to the fire road, Norris and Bittaker took turns R-wording Schaefer, showing absolutely no mercy. What the fuck? Schaefer pleaded for only 1 second to pray before Norris attempted to strangle her with his bare hands. About 45 seconds of that, and Norris looking dead in her eyes, he became disturbed. He let go of her neck and ran to the front of the van and threw up. Bittaker then grabbed Schaefer and strangled her with his bare hands until she started to have convulsions. He then grabbed a coat hanger, he wrapped it around her neck, and tightened it with a vice grip until her convulsions stopped. Schaefer was denied her request to pray that day. That is horrifying. Schaefer's body was wrapped in a shower curtain and thrown down a big canyon. Bittaker and Norris drove off, and that was that. They claimed their first victim. On July 8th, 1979, only 2 weeks after the murder of Lucinda Schaefer, Bittaker and Norris see Andrea Hall on the side of the road hitchhiking along the Pacific Coast Highway. Two men go to pull their van off to the side of the road to offer her a ride at the same time as a car in front of them does the same thing. So that car beat Murder Mac to Andrea. Andrea got in the first car and they took off. Instead of forgetting about her, just moving on, They followed the car all the way to Redondo Beach. They witnessed Miss Hall get out of the car from a distance, give it a few minutes, and then they pull Murder Mac up to Miss Hall and offer her another ride. But this time, it's just Bittaker in the front seat. Norris jumped in the back to make it look less intimidating, like Bittaker was riding alone. So he pulls up next to Miss Hall, he sparks up a conversation, he ends up getting out of the van, comes around, continues the conversation. He's very friendly, so is Miss Hall. So after about 10 to 15 minutes of talking, Bittaker offers Hall a drink. She says, yeah, totally. And he says, okay, go ahead. It's in my van. Go ahead and help yourself. Just open the sliding door, hop in. It's in the ice chest right under the bed. You can't miss it. Right when she steps in the van, Norris pops out, jumps on her. Bittaker quickly shuts the door, runs around to the driver's seat, and pulls off. Ended up grabbing Hall's arm and twisting it behind her back so hard that it almost broke. He bound her legs and wrists with construction tape so she couldn't move, and Bittaker cranked up the radio. Bittaker and Norris drove Hall to a location in the San Gabriel Mountains beyond where they took Schaefer. At this location, she was R-worded twice by Bittaker and once by Norris, which happened outside of the van, behind the van, near a bush. In the midst of one of the attacks, headlights appear from the distance. A sense of relief likely flooded Hall, but before she knew it, a hand covered her mouth and she was thrown down in a big bush. Norris jumped in the van and drove off to try and find the headlights, likely to take care of the witnesses if they happened to see anything. When he got back, he picked up Bittaker and Hall and drove to a location further in the San Gabriel Mountains. On their way there, they stripped Hall of all of her clothing and kicked her out of the van, forcing her to run up a hill on the outside of the van while they drove next to her. Those sick motherfuckers. When they got far enough into the forest, Bittaker forced Hall to perform things on him as he took pictures on a Polaroid camera of her doing that and posing in other sick positions. Then they left again. Bittaker and Norris drove Hall to a third location. This time Norris dropped Bittaker and Hall off at this location and drove to the nearest convenience store to buy more beer and drinks. When Norris returned to the mountains, Bittaker was alone. Bittaker also had 2 more Polaroid pictures that he took of Hall in absolute sheer terror as she begged for her life. Bittaker told Norris that he told Hall he was going to kill her and challenged her to give him any reason to spare her life. As she was about to speak and start giving him reasons, he drove an ice pick through her ear and into her brain. They rolled her body off a cliff. Bittaker and Norris were definitely nervous about being caught, but not even one of their victims' bodies were found. These missing teenagers were literally being written off as just that, a missing person. So after just a few short months of silence, Bittaker and Norris decided on their next victim with confidence. Instead of going for one girl, they were going to go after 2. On September 3rd, Bittaker and Norris spotted 2 girls named Jackie Gilliam and Jacqueline Lamp sitting on a bus stop bench near Hermosa Beach. Lamp and Gilliam had been hitchhiking for weeks at that point along the Pacific Coast Highway, and get this, they were 13 and 15 years old. So when Bittaker and Norris asked them if they wanted a ride, they didn't even think twice. Inside the van, both girls were offered party favors and they said yes. As soon as the 2 girls realized they were being taken into the San Gabriel Mountains, they started to flip their shit. They yelled, they screamed, they kicked, they punched, they scratched, but they were 13 and 15. They were kids, they're tiny. The moment and realization in that moment for those 2 girls, I couldn't even imagine. During the initial hectic scene, Lamp, the 13-year-old, actually grabbed the van door, tried to open it, but as her hand gripped the handle, she was bashed over the head with a bag of lead weights, knocking her out. 15-year-old Jackie Gilliam was easily overpowered right after that. Both of the girls were bound, gagged, and ultimately held captive in the San Gabriel Mountains for 2 whole days, which it's worth to note is different than their last victims. Bittaker and Norris slept right next to their hostages for 2 nights, R-wording both girls whenever they wanted. Bittaker also took his sick Polaroids. And just when you thought these 2 guys couldn't get any sicker, Bittaker created a tape recording of himself in the act of R-wording Gilliam. In this tape, he pretends she's his cousin and tells Gilliam to express her pain to scream. He also used an ice pick to stab at her upper chest area and pliers to rip off parts of her upper chest area. Essentially, these were torture tapes. They made them to satisfy their sick fantasies and probably as trophies because these two men didn't plan on getting caught. These tapes were never released to the public, but the transcripts of the tapes are out there on the internet. If you guys want to go search for them, go right ahead. Jackie Gilliam and Jacqueline Lamp died of blunt force trauma to the head by ice pick, and their bodies were dumped over an embankment. Bittaker and Norris abducted their final victim, 16-year-old Shirley Ledford, on October 31st, 1979. She was just trying to hitchhike home from a Halloween party in Sunland, a suburb in Los Angeles. Sadly, Ledford agreed to get in their van. She was offered marijuana by Norris, which she refused. Bittaker drove the van to a secluded street where Norris quickly drew a knife on Ledford, then bound and gagged her with construction tape. Bittaker then traded places with Norris, who then drove away and drove around the city for about an hour while Bittaker was in the back of the van with Ledford. After removing the construction tape from the girl's mouth and legs, Bittaker tormented Ledford with the goal of making her scream as loud as possible. Before the attack started though, Bittaker started a tape recording. He beat Shirley Ledford with a hammer as well as mutilated her down there with pliers, Norris later describing it as constant screaming in the back of the van. Norris switched Bittaker's spots, and then Norris started his abuse on the 16-year-old. Jesus. One thing Norris did different was he grabbed a sledgehammer and absolutely pounded Ledford's elbow around 20 times, completely shattering it in every which way, leaving Shirley Ledford in shock. After about 2 hours of torment only the devil could produce, Norris grabbed a wire coat hanger, wrapped it around Ledford's neck, and tightened it with pliers until she stopped moving. Now with 5 victims claimed and 0 bodies found, Bittaker and Norris were next level confident. They thought they were never going to get caught. Get this. So instead of dropping Ledford's body in the mountains like the others, they took Shirley Ledford into a random neighborhood in the middle of the night, chose a random house, and left her body on the front lawn. That is sinister. Even with the body left in plain daylight, Bittaker and Norris were able to fly so far under the radar, it's sickening. No one suspected them of anything. Their downfall didn't come until one of them couldn't keep their mouth shut. Just a month after their last victim, Norris reaches out to an old prison friend to confide in him about his and Bittaker's last 5 months. His name was Joseph Jackson. They did time together in San Luis Obispo. I'm sure it was pretty tough for both men to live in silence, so it makes sense that he ended up reaching out to somebody else. At first, Jackson didn't believe a word he was saying, but then without hesitation, Norris spilled some sick details about the murder of Shirley Ledford, because at that point, she was the only body that was recovered due to it being left in the front yard. Norris also told his friend Jackson that in addition to the 5 murders, there were a few that actually got away, some without being R-worded, and one in particular that was. They ended up just letting her go. So Joseph Jackson sat there and listened to Norris talk about all this sick shit him and Bittaker did to all these teenagers. Part of him is questioning if it's all true, but there was way too much detail for him not to take it serious. So he took the information straight to his lawyer like a good boy, and they went to the police. A Hermosa Beach detective named Paul Binham was assigned to investigate Jackson's claims. What Jackson was saying about Norris matched a report on file of several teenage girls that went missing in the 5 months prior. Hello, but it goes deeper. There was one particular incident that Norris told Jackson about where him and Bittaker had maced a woman in the face. He told Jackson how they dragged her into the GMC and then both R-worded her and then let her go. Thank God. The victim reported this incident, but again, Bittaker and Norris flew completely under the radar due to lack of physical evidence. The victim of that abduction is named Robin Robeck, who recounted her attackers to be in their mid-30s with mustaches, Caucasian. So in other words, she got a good look at him, but again, no physical evidence. Detective Brenham caught word that Miss Robeck knows what these two guys look like, so he sent an investigator up to her house in Oregon. The investigator showed Robin Robeck a series of mugshots to see if she could pick the 2 men out that attacked her. And without hesitation, Robin Robeck pulled 2 pictures out of the lineup and said, "Those are the 2 men. Those are the guys that attacked me." And guess whose pictures she picked up, guys? Bittaker and Norris. So at this point, Bittaker and Norris are unofficially linked to the R word of Robin Robeck. And I say unofficially because it's sad to say, but at that point, it's their word against hers in court. They needed some type of physical evidence besides her picking out their picture in a lineup. So the Hermosa Beach police placed Norris under surveillance, and within days, they arrested Norris for dealing marijuana. On November 20th, 1979, Norris was arrested for parole violation. The same day at the Burbank Motel, Bittaker was also taken into custody. These monsters were finally off of our streets. A search of Bittaker's apartment revealed several Polaroid photographs which were depicting Miss Hall and Miss Gilliam, both of whom were reported missing earlier that year. Inside the van, investigators discovered a sledgehammer, a plastic bag filled with lead weights, a book detailing how to locate police radio frequencies, a jar of Vaseline, 2 necklaces, and a tape recording of a young woman in obvious distress, screaming and repeatedly pleading for mercy. You can hear the assault going on in the tape. This is the first time investigators are listening to the tapes. Also found at the homes of both Bittaker and Norris were Polaroid pictures of almost 500 teenage girls and young women that didn't know they were getting their picture taken. On November 30th, 1979, Norris went to a preliminary hearing in relation to the September 30th R word against Robin Robeck. So Norris was in court. At the hearing, Norris waived his Miranda rights before Detective Binham and Deputy District Attorney Stephen Kay began questioning him. They were drilling this guy. The questioning started about Robin Robeck, and Norris was noticeably freaking out on the stand when all of a sudden one of the detectives dropped a bomb question on Norris. This question was about Mr. Joseph Jackson. Then they dumped a mountain of evidence that they gathered from his house, from Bittaker's house. They were unloading on this guy, and he was silent, completely silent. Until he wasn't. He started to confess. He started to tell the courts everything. It may have been a different version of events in who was the mastermind behind everything, but Norris was talking. Norris ended up throwing Bittaker so far under the bus, not even Jesus Christ could pull him out. Roy Norris told a courtroom full of people him and Lawrence Bittaker committed these crimes for fun. Norris pleads guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder in relation to Miss Hall, 2 counts of R-word, and 1 count of robbery. He was offered a deal so outrageous, I consider it a slap in the face to the victims and their families. He was sentenced to 45 years to life with the possibility of parole in 2010. On February 17th, 1981, after deliberating for 3 days only, the jury found Lawrence Bittaker guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 charge of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, 5 charges of kidnapping, 9 charges of R-word, 2 charges of forcible oral manipulation, 1 charge of sodomy, and 3 charges of unlawful possession of a firearm. And on March 25th, 1981, Lawrence Bittaker was formally sentenced to death. There was quite literally mountains of evidence against Bittaker and Norris, but the most disturbing piece of evidence were the tapes. 17 minutes of these tapes were played during Bittaker's trial for a courtroom full of people, a judge, and a jury. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris were never granted parole, and both men died in prison. Well, guys, that's the story. We dove into the lives of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, the brutal crimes they committed, how they met, and what branded them as the Toolbox Killers. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. Peace.